premium crowd you've managed here today. Thank you. My name is Kim Sattler and I'm a member of Spirit of Eureka, but in my former life I was a Secretary of Unions ACT in Canberra and a long friend of the Aboriginal land rights movement. So I love to see books like this produced to tell some of the real history of what's actually happened to Aboriginal people in our country. I'd like to acknowledge that we do stand on Gadigal land, part of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present and to those continuing the long, proud custodianship of this land. I'd first of all like to introduce Tim Blackman, who is a Bundjalung man. He's a high school teacher and he's a PhD candidate studying high poverty education. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Lindy, for inviting me. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather, the Gadigal people, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I grew up on Wiradjuri country, live on Gadigal land and work on Darug country, and I respect those three nations. The land of my great-grandmother is Bundjalung. The land of my mother and grandfather is Australia, because they grew up denied their culture, land and identity. So I acknowledge their loss and recognise the importance of my ability today to stand here and proudly say I am a First Nation Australian and a part of one of the longest living cultures in the world. As a part of my own growth and journey with culture, I've been so fortunate to spend time with some amazing people with stories to tell that inspire and guide me. And today I feel very honoured to know Lindy and for her to share with me her knowledge and research contained in this fantastic book, Driving Disunity, the Business Council Against Aboriginal Community. Here comes the English teacher in me now. This book provides such a clear and analytical narrative of the ways that big business, through the Business Council, have sought to divide and conquer not only Aboriginal land and communities, but our very identity and sense of custodianship on this land. One example of this in the book that I particularly enjoyed seeing articulated was how language is used to colonise and divide us. In my acknowledgement to country, I always use the word custodian because, as Lindy points out in her book, spoiler alert, corporate bosses would prefer owned rather than custodians because in the capitalist system, something owned can be utilised to create profit. Well, that's not what Aboriginal community's relationship with land is about. So when we live and exist in this capitalist paradigm, it can be quite challenging to seek out alternatives or take a step back and actually question what is going on. Cadetships, internships, apprenticeships and individuals' opportunities are something that us educators view positively in the interest of our students, and we're always excited for our individual students' success within businesses. Yet what Lindy's book has asked me and will ask you to do is really view that and the individual gain against the big business agenda of profiting and exploitation. As a young activist, surprise, surprise, of the socialist variety, the ideas are not necessarily new to me, but it has provided a material history of how this exploitation has come to be against my peoples, and it's been very eye-opening and somewhat depressing. Thank you, Lindy. At the core of it, I was drawn back to one of my favourite quotes from Martin Luther King, his call that an individual has not started living until he can rise above the narrow confines of his individualistic concerns to the broader concerns of humanity. I was reminded that within our context, capitalism goes fundamentally against what Martin Luther King calls for, and it goes fundamentally against my people's, our people's 60,000-year-long collectivism, kinship, and interdependence of all living things. Lindy ends her book with the tale of two leaders, which really personifies the direction our communities can and have taken since invasion and colonisation. As a young and fairly new activist to the game, the story of Bennelong and the story of Pemulwuy really hit a chord with how I can mobilise in my activism across causes, and indeed my existence as a young Aboriginal man. compromise an individual gain, or fighting to the end for all or nothing. So thank you, Lindy, for your work, your solidarity and your invitation today. And I hope to, in my lifetime, respond to your book's call by saying that as a young Aboriginal man, I will fight for sovereignty and for unity against all like the Business Council of Australia, who under the guise of empowerment try to divide and colonise my community. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Next we have Kerry Toomey, who is a Gamilaroi woman who reckons she isn't an elder, although many would dispute this. I think Lindy must have written this. She recently retired after over 3 decades as a public primary school teacher in schools with large concentrations of Aboriginal children. She is now a full-time visual artist whose work explores her family's history, particularly her grandmother's work on the mission in the Pilliga. I'd like you to welcome Kerry Toomey.
When I first came to Sydney, I met up with Lindy, oh God, so long ago, with all my children, and my son is 30, so I think we've known each other 30 plus anyway. We'll go from there. When I was teaching early days. So I'm sort of overwhelmed. I have to fess up, I haven't read the book. I've bought it and I've got it in my bag for my homework so that I know what I went to today. And so there's no comment about the book, but this is my comment about Lindy. You know, a lot of Aboriginal people, when they leave their community and they go off to another place to learn, and it's really nice to have somebody who you can call a friend. And when I met Lindy, I knew that I was a friend, and we have stayed friends for all of that time. I met her through my husband, and he's got stories of Lindy from when they were radicals, and she's never stopped being radical. And he hasn't either, on a quite kind of level. But in terms of life, I know that once you're a friend of Lindy's, you are in her space. Mind you, she walks the talk. If you give a shit, she'll give it back. So far, I haven't had it given back yet, except we will discuss the fact about elders, because I will get there one day. And I suppose that in life, like I was a fringe dweller from Pilliga Scrub, lived on the outskirts of town in Wellington, New South Wales as well, and Dubbo, and I've taught I came to Sydney to learn to be a teacher and then go home. And home is where you are. I've learned that. You can be on country and take what you have to give to other people. And Lindy has been one of those friends who has, when my son was needing a tutor, high school, she stepped up and she tutored him. And I would always be grateful for that. She's always been a friend, which she has to many people in this room. And once I read this book, I suppose it's a new side, because I've seen her as a pretty much a friend of our family, a surfer and bushwalker, and definitely somebody who I admire. And I listened to her do her speech for the Teachers Federation when she became a life member. I went home and I said, shit, really? She can really talk? I was so impressed. I took that speech away. But on my way out the door, I was on the stage that day, and she said, I didn't know you did public speaking. I thought, oh, I blew my cover now. So here I am, doing some public speaking. But in life, Lindy, you know, one solid person who I admire and is now an author. How cool is that? And I won't ramble on, because, you know, we all have stories about her. Some would be really juicy ones, I'm sure, and some that, you know that she got you back. And if all of us, Aboriginal people, when we came to Sydney to do study, if we met people like that, we would finish our courses and stay, because we know people care about us. So we all have a job in looking after our students who are going through studies and off-country and doing other things. So thank you for the opportunity to talk. And I think I forgot to even say it. I acknowledge country, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and future, and everybody in the room. And I've always, in my teaching, taught children that on country, we are all looking after country. It's everybody's business. And here we are, going in that next step. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kerry. I'm going to call Lindy up next. Now, I can tell quite a lot of stories about Lindy, but I won't share most of them with you. Because we go back nearly 40 years, somewhere between 35 and 40. So it doesn't surprise me at all that Lindy at this point in her life would write a book like this, because she's got the time and the space, and she's been involved in this struggle for a very long time. And now's the time we should be telling all these stories and getting this history out, because all the young fellas need to know what's come before so they can actually build on what's going to happen in the future. But also the rest of Australia has to start waking up to what our real history is. So this is part of it. So I'd like to welcome Lindy up to tell you about why she wrote the book.
I also acknowledge the Gadigal custodians who never ceded their sovereignty over this land, and pay respect to elders and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders present today. I'm very grateful to Spirit of Eureka's Kim and for being the MC, and to Tim and Kerry for speaking. Youthful intelligence and deep experience combined are a great force for change, and we have it here. Thanks to Richard, Wrongway and Pat, who made today possible, to the Emery Way for the free use of this room, and my publisher and one of my political homes, Spirit of Eureka. Thank you everyone for coming, particularly my mob from the Teachers Federation, who've given up their lunch break even after a division at a very demanding 3-day conference. This book focuses on the biggest and overwhelmingly foreign-owned corporations in Australia, organised through their peak body, their inner cabinet of power, the Business Council of Australia. And specifically on their operations in ATSI, that's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander affairs. Two friends, because I have a wide circle of friends, two friends asked why I saw corporate involvement in ATSI communities as a problem. What giant corporations, what's not to like? Well, their murderous lies on asbestos and tobacco, blatant tax avoidance and plundering of resources that's left governments like WA's in huge debt, despite the longest, most profitable mining boom in history. I'm just going to move this. I'm trying to get this right because it's popping at me. Sorry. Corporations were behind and benefited from privatisation of hugely profitable state-owned assets at fire sale prices from compliant governments. Corporations poison the environment, shift jobs offshore, where greater exploitation means greater profits. Out at sea, they hijack Australian seafarers and helicopter exploited foreign crews. But they do offer some choice. Sometimes. In CUB's case, cop this wage cut, 65%, or cop the sack. Some choice. But it's war that best illustrates what corporations will do in their compulsive hunt for super profits. 94% of Australians opposed the US-led war on Iraq without UN sanction. Yet our democracy marched right on in. The evidence was clear what would happen, and I've never been so sorry to have been proved right in my life. Iraq splintered, a training ground for terrorists created, misery spreading across the Middle East, across once minor fault lines between Muslims and secularists or within Islam itself split asunder. Disunity at its most horrific. Raytheon, Halliburton, and all the weapons corporations reaping untold ongoing billions, no end in sight. That's why I distrust corporations. So seeing their hands so busily at work in ATSI communities, saying, we only prosper when the communities we operate in prosper, as they do, I smelled a rat, especially when they're telling governments who've always done what they wanted, now broke because they've sold everything, to step aside and let the saviours in. In driving Disunity, I try to explain what they're doing, how they're doing it and why. 230 years of government policies that have supported invaders against ATSI peoples. First, an undeclared war against guerrilla warriors with no treaties, just suppression. That policy served the British and eventually their corporate inheritors well. Theft of children, for example, is a genocidal act of war. And when you systematically steal kids, is it any wonder they struggle when they become parents? But divide and conquer is most effective in consolidating rule. Corporations, still overwhelmingly backed by government, ran into trouble when a new battle for land rights exploded, exposing reality to more and more Australians. Later, in 1988, the largest gathering of ATSI peoples in this continent's 60,000-year history marched from Redfern on January 26. By the year 2000, 1 million mainstream Australians were marching in support. That's big. That's trouble for corporations. That year also marks a strategic change and the birth of a plan by the BCA to systematically create a new architecture for Aboriginal affairs, which this book identifies as divide and conquer. There are winners in the process. Some of the programs are much needed, but there are losers, ignored, or worse, systematically locked out. Media megaphones of BCA's News Corp and its rancid mates in Fox and Co amplify those ATSI peoples, like Marshall Langton, who supported the Northern Territory intervention and praises corporations as saviours for ATSI peoples. But Marshall Langton attacking Alice Springs town camper Barb Shaw for having white friends was a bit rich when you see her at Garma Festival in Arnhem Land surrounded by white corporate big fellas. Her voice, not corporations, is the one that identifies environmentalists as enemies of ATSI's peoples. Having lieutenants to promote policies at those who resist. Sorry, I'm a bit lost here. I rewrote something this morning. Having ATSI lieutenants to promote policies and attack those who resist is a major strategic advantage for the BCA. Noel Pearson joined corporate representatives in pushing the massively funded and until recently one-sided and publicised constitutional recognition process. How was this divide and conquer? Well, it immediately excludes anyone who thinks parliamentarians should swear allegiance to the people, not the British Queen, who want a genuinely independent country, or see the Constitution as the invader's document. The book shows mining magnate Hugh Morgan setting up, backing the Samuel Griffith Society, whispering constitutional recognition into John Howard's shell-like ear. It's a pitiful ghost of an ATSEC proposal of 1995. Uphold and recognise an organisation which Pearson lauded on the post-Q&A Uluru is a much more subtle beast than the Samuel Griffith Society, including progressives Tom Keneally and Marie Bashir. But there's many of the same far-right characters, including, if I remember correctly, George Pell, whose name mysteriously disappeared from the site last week. Keeping some consistency, though, founder Julian Leeser, now federal member for Barara, was a Samuel Griffith Society conference convener for years, and now it's vice president. It's neither my role nor the book's to point an accusing finger at Marshall Langdon or Noel Pearson. How would I react if my friends, family, neighbours, workmates lived with over 2 centuries of cumulative, ongoing devastation and traumatic stress, and the richest and most powerful forces in the country suddenly offered to help? But that help is very selective. I spoke before about war. A week ago, on the 10th anniversary of the Northern Territory intervention, former Labor Senator Nova Peris, no raging radical, said that the intervention was seen by those living on community as an act of war against Aboriginal peoples by government. Imagine if every parent from your particular ethnic background was told every single one of your kids under 16 had to be physically examined for signs of sexual abuse. If outside your home or mine, a sign was erected banning alcohol or pornography. If you were told you couldn't rent or buy a kid's video or have cash or had to buy in person at designated shops many hours from home where you couldn't send a trusted friend to buy for everyone but had to go in person, and where police could demand your identity card before allowing access, and your kids said, "Mummy, why do we have to stand in this line when those people get to pay over there?" How would you feel if you were accused of running a pedophile ring by someone purporting to be a long-time social worker on your community who hadn't spent a day there, but actually worked for Federal Minister Mal Brough just before the intervention, within weeks? This happened to the male elders of Mutijulu community, Uluru. All a lie, spread with huge media coverage, and Marshall Langdon applauded it all. That's just scratching the surface, why every mark of the lives of Atsi peoples in the Territory and elsewhere have gone backwards. On the opening page of Driving Disunity, Michael Rose, a leading light of the BCA in Atsi affairs, said its members have extraordinary influence in the way they have discussions with government. Why their silence on the intervention, which suspended the Land Rights Act, forced 99-year leases on communities, and allowed anyone and everyone, including white pedophiles, to march right in onto Aboriginal lands? Why did the BCA or its companies not speak up in 2014 when 400 homelands were slated for demolition in WA and South Australia? Gina Rinehart's Australians for Northern Development and Economic Vision and its Voice for the North was strangely silent. In No Sugar, Nyunga playwright Jack Davis retold history as he heard it and lived it. Billy Kimberley, an old conflicted man worthy of Shakespeare, recounts the massacre of his people at Woomwulgari in 1926.
It never failed to shock and silence my drama students. The first homeland demolished in WA was in Bulgaria. The new terra nullius. Why speak up? Perhaps the BCA did, and I missed it. Their outrage certainly didn't splash across our screens with a huge fanfare given to Twiggy's good deeds or favourite ATSI leaders. Empty lands are easier to exploit. If you want to cry from anger and shame, read John Altman's short article, An Anniversary Remembered, on those homelands still left in the territory, systematically starved of funding. They have nothing. Young Clinton Pryor is quietly creating hope, shining light on forgotten communities as he walks from Perth, via Alice and Uluru, Adelaide, Melbourne, and now heading to Sydney and then Canberra, a promise to his deceased father that he would help create a better future for his people. He's not alone. Young ATSI peoples, inspired by their elders, are out and marching again in very big numbers. My short book brings together some of the voices for hope that are finally being heard. It's an accidental book. After a short article with material left over, it kept growing. A lot's been left out, more work to do. Apparently the beginning is a bit like an ancient Chinese novel with too many characters and connections to be easily comprehensible without a header. My advice, skim the lists I include, but try to get a sense of the breadth of the connections. Teachers, look out for an old friend, the Boston Consulting Group, helping hatch the PCA plan back in 2000, and our mate Greg Craven. If there are any construction workers here, they'll find Mirvac and Lendlease's busy hands on the Central Coast on dark and young lands being bought and sold for profit. I'm told the second half is much easier read. Thanks, so, if you get stuck, just head through to the interesting bits. Again, thanks for coming. I hope you read the book. I hope it raises questions and ideas that you can share. I'm ready to be challenged so I can learn. I live in love, safety, comfort and community on stolen Aboriginal land. A beneficiary of an ongoing, often hidden Holocaust. This little book is my first real attempt to pay a bit of rent. There's more to come. Thank you very much.